The following is a local resident producer's program. The program content is the sole responsibility of the producer and does not necessarily reflect the views or policies of CATV2, Oshkosh Community Media Services, the City of Oshkosh, or Time Warner Cable.
Hi everybody, welcome to On Oshkosh. Cheryl, Hentz, and Dan Rylance here. Very pleased to welcome Senator Randy Hopper back to our table on this edition. Randy was supposed to be interviewed about a month ago, I think it was, and Joint Finance was in session, and there were some scheduling snafus, I think, between your campaign people and us. So,
Well, that wasn't my campaign people. That would have probably been my legislative staff, because I'm not sure, but we were in the middle of being a member of Joint Finance. We were trying to get the budget passed at that time.
But there were snafus, and so it kind of left us hanging, but we're glad you're here tonight.
Well, I certainly apologize. That had I known, I would have made sure I reached out to you, but...
No. You're here tonight. That's the
absolutely.
That's right.
Glad to be here.
So,
Yeah, good.
Anyway, we want to talk about a lot of things tonight. First of all, the recall election, which this is going to run just before the recall election, and then we want to talk about the budget and the whole process that sort of ensued as a result of that and so forth. Now these numbers, Dan, you got me these numbers, so I hope they're accurate. 23,946 signatures were filed to recall you, and that's more than 50% of the total votes that you received in winning the seat 3 years ago. Why do you feel so many people want to see you out of office?
Well, it's about 50% of the people that didn't vote for me last time too, actually, and there was a huge effort put on play. I think we saw what happened in Madison. Tensions and emotions were certainly running very high. I will tell you that some of the people that originally signed that said they wanted to take another look, and they came to some of the open listening sessions that I had. Met with them individually, and they've changed their mind based on an opportunity to talk about it, based on an opportunity to see now that we're a couple of months down the road from the heightened emotion that was happening in Madison. I mean, I think no one can argue. It was emotion like no one had seen in the political landscape probably anywhere. And so there was this huge move. There was a huge organization afoot. I mean, many people, when they thought about the budget repair bill, a lot of people looked, if you read all the articles, they'd say, where's Senator Hopper going to vote? And that's for two reasons. The first reason is I've spent 2 years in Madison working on both sides of the aisle, working on issues that affect correctional officers, but also issues that affect education, working with different senators regardless of what party they were. So they didn't know where I'd go, because I sort of got the reputation that if it was good public policy, I worked with either side. The second reason why my name was always brought up was because they knew the district. The correctional facilities that lie within the district, universities, the tech schools that lie within the district. And when you look at all of those organizations, those are good collectives that were affected by this bill that are in one place in order to allow you to garner a lot of signatures at that time. I mean, we challenged some of the signatures. There were, deceased people that had signed my papers. There was reports of people that signed my papers that didn't sign my papers.
But clearly they had enough signatures.
And I knew they would. I knew they would. In fact, people say, was that a surprise to you? And the answer is no. The day that everything broke loose in Madison, there were members of groups that were heavily involved in the recall process that basically said to me, point blank, Senator, you won't have another challenge in your election, in an election in this seat, just vote no. But if you vote yes, if you support the governor on this, we're coming after you. We're going to come after you professionally. We're going to come after you politically. We're going to come after you personally. They told me it was going to happen. So when people say, were you surprised? No, I wasn't surprised because they followed through on what they said they were going to do. I expected exactly what we got to happen.
Most politicians, when the crowd is going over there, they go over with them. Why did you go in to bust the unions?
Well,
why take away collective bargaining?
Well, first off, it wasn't about busting the unions at all. It was entirely a fiscal. There was a fiscal component to this. I mean, every element of collective bargaining has a fiscal tie to it. And answer this, Dan. If it doesn't have a fiscal tie, and the argument was, well, the collective bargaining isn't fiscal. If it's not fiscal, ask yourself, why were 14 of my colleagues hiding out in Illinois to block a vote? Because they knew it was fiscal. I asked an attorney in Fond du Lac, we were sitting in a Rotary, and someone said, well, why don't you just pull out the collective bargaining and vote on it, get that through? And he goes, you do that, you'll get challenged in court and you'll lose. Because every component...
Being challenged in court anyway.
That's, you know what the problem, one of the problems in Madison right now, in the current system, is that we understand that every time we try to pass something as a majority, it's going to get pushed to Dane County Court. We're going to have to not only go through the regular legislative process that has happened, you know, this is the 100th Senate. It's happened for the 100 Senates before, but we've never seen anything like this before. Right. There was an election in November. We set a clear trajectory of where we wanted to take the state. But now one group that wasn't successful in that election decided that they're going to try to muddy the waters between the different branches of government. And just because the legislature, the majority passes something, they're going to send it to, right now, a Dane County court, and it's going to get put into that court. This wasn't all about busting in the unions. In fact, I will tell you this. I worked with members.
How can you say it wasn't about busting unions? You took away their collective bargaining rights. You screwed them.
Well, first off, be careful to understand this. You know what? That's one of the areas where I think the message got blurred a little bit.
Well, let's unblur it.
Well, let's unblur it.
Yeah.
The first thing is you call them rights. These are negotiated benefits. In fact, in the federal court case that's going on right now, the attorneys for the plaintiffs challenging the state on the collective bargaining law had to admit in court last week they're not rights. These aren't rights. These are negotiated benefits. I talk to people all the time who say to me, you took away my God-given right. And I said, it's a right for you to get an extra vacation day. It's a negotiated benefit, which, by the way, was negotiated in fair with the parties that were negotiating it, and it was paid. We can't afford those things any longer. We can't afford those benefits any longer. So this is about moving forward.
You raised their health care and you raised their retirement.
Sure.
Wasn't that enough?
Well, first off, Dan, let me tell you this. I met with members in the 18th Senate District for 2 years. From the moment I got into the state Senate, I talked with members of the local unions. In fact, the first couple of weeks I was in the state legislature, 80% of my meetings were with people that actively supported my opponent in the election. And my message to them was, you know what, we're not going to agree on everything, but let's figure out what we do agree on and let's try to get that done. And in the course of that, created a relationship with members of the unions, of the public sector unions, that we could have meetings. So regularly, I went to the retirement parties with members of the union. When Governor Doyle signed legislation to pass John Doe legislation to protect correctional officers against frivolous lawsuits, as he's signing the bill in Waupun Prison, he says, you know what, I need to stop because this piece of legislation wouldn't have got wheels if Senator Hopper wasn't there and brought his party on. So the point is, the weeks before everything happened in Madison, I met with members of the local union. In fact, it even can be tied back to December, when the contract was trying to be pushed through by the outgoing majority, Democratic majority. I met the week that those contracts were trying to be extended. Now understand, they were, I think, between 15 or 18 months past the due date on when the contracts would have been signed. 15 months, and it was a 0-0 contract, 0 raise, 0 cut. And it took 18 months past when it was due to negotiate a contract. Over the last 10 years, most contracts with the public employee unions have had that kind of extended due date. So, I said to them back in December, and I met with members of the leadership. I met with them in Madison, I met with them in Waupun, and I met with them in Oshkosh. And I said, instead of playing this war of the words, war of words in the press, and I said it to both sides. I said it to the governor's people, and I said it to Marty Beal and his team. You can't play that game, because once you do that, you draw a line in the sand. And in order to save face, no one can actually sit down at a table to negotiate. So I asked the members of the union in a meeting. I said, instead of trying to force this through, which is what they were trying to do. And by the way, I said to them, you're going to be successful at this. The week before we went to vote on this, I didn't know that Senator Decker, then the majority leader, or Senator Paley were going to vote against the extension of the contract. But I said to them, you're sending the wrong message. You're sending the message to the incoming governor that you're not willing to sit down at a table and work with them. And it will have, a result when he comes in January that's not going to be good, because in January you're going to find out that the majority is in the Senate is in the opposite party, majority in the Assembly is in the opposite party, and the governor's in the opposite party. So instead of creating this war of the words right now, talk to them about working with them. And they said no. They said we're going to do that anyway. So then you talk about pension and health care, right? A week before everything again really broke loose in Madison, I had meetings. I sat with Representative Hentz, and Gordon and I have worked together on many issues in 2 years. And Gordon and I had a meeting. I think the first meeting was about 7 or 8 o'clock at night, and it was about a 3-hour meeting. And then the second meeting started around midnight. I don't remember the exact times, but there were 2 shifts that we met with. And the message was clear to me then. People said, listen, we have earned the pension and the health care benefits, and we're not about to give them up. They said, over our dead bodies, will we contribute pension and health care? And we will go against the government. So that was before collective bargaining was brought up. So at that point, they said, absolutely no way would we be willing to negotiate that. And I said, I'm trying to work with them. And they were in my office the day of everything broke. So now let's go forward. And you said pension and health care is enough, right? Well, the first opportunity, and I saw the TV ads just like everybody else did. The firefighters stand with their brothers and sisters.
And the police.
Until the very first opportunity, they had to prove it. Mayor Barrett, Democratic mayor of Milwaukee, with reduced funding coming to Milwaukee from the state, went to his local firefighter union and said, okay, guys, I saw the ads. I saw you're willing to step up and pay pension and health care. Now's your great opportunity. And they told him no. Just recently, at the end of the budget, new superintendent in Milwaukee Public Schools. Dan, we were talking about MPS and the problems that MPS is having. The new superintendent's coming in, and he has a Herculean task. I was on the education committee last session, and I was there during the mayoral debate. And so we've got finally a guy who's in there leading. So he goes to his union and says, I need your help. You talked about willingness to pay pension and health care. Now's your opportunity to stand up and help the district, because the district is going to get significantly cut. So they said, you know what, we would, Superintendent, but if we open up our contract, which was fast-tracked in November, if we open up our contract, we will fall under all of the rest of Act 10, the budget repair bill. And so we'll lose our collective bargaining if we do that. So Senator Taylor, Milwaukee, came to me, a Democrat, and said, I need your help. This superintendent and Milwaukee Public Schools need your help. And she knew at that time, the way things play in Madison, if she tried to bring it to the Joint Finance Committee, probably wouldn't go where. So she asked me to bring it, right? But here's my point. So what I did was we passed a piece of legislation that said, Milwaukee Public School teachers, you can open up your contract, but you can only deal with pension and health care. None of the other things can be touched to address your very concerns. So the superintendent went to the teachers and said, to the teachers union, and said, okay, I got what you wanted. I got the protections you want. You can save 250 jobs, and you can save the school district $19 million a year. And you're protected from all the other collective bargaining things. And they said, we'll go back. Came back the next day, and you know what they said? They said no. And guess what happened? 450 people lost their jobs in Milwaukee, including 250 educators, lost their jobs. You know, when people are upset about this and they're pointing their finger at those of us who did this, they ought to look at within themselves at their own leadership within their union, because you know what? Their leadership abandoned 250 of their educators, as opposed to Kakana, which is hiring back people because they embraced the changes.
I want to jump in here now. I got so many things swirling through my head here, Randy. I don't even know where to start. Let's talk about the collective bargaining thing a little bit more. How do you respond to the news reports that came out right after, the budget repair bill passed, that said that things would have been just fine. The budget could have been balanced just fine without taking away collective bargaining. That piece of it did not need to be in there.
Well, I'll give you some other example. I mean, I've got a ton. Heartland School District, the teachers overwhelmingly voted to switch their health care recently from We at Trust, which is controlled by the teachers union, to United Healthcare, which a lot of other state employees are on. Okay, now school districts need to collectively bargain with the teachers unions in individual school districts. One of the collectively bargained components is their health care plan. The teachers overwhelmingly voted to switch to United, saving the school district $670,000 a year. And you know who blocked it? The teachers union blocked it. Last session on education.
But President the question that I asked, though.
Well, that is the question that you asked.
No, that's not what I asked. I asked, why did you have to take away collective bargaining rights? I'm going to use that word because it is something that, it may not be a God-given right. I disagree with the person who said that. But it is a right under what they bargained for. So if you want to call it a benefit, we'll call it a benefit. I'm going to call it a right because it's something that they bargained for. But whatever, you didn't have to take away collective bargaining in order to get the budget to balance, and that was the question. So if you didn't need that to be taken away in order to balance the budget, why was it taken away?
Well, as I mentioned, most contracts were 16 to 18 months past the due date when you could sit in a room when there's 0-0. Medical assistance was going broke in April, was going to be out of money. We didn't have money to operate our prison facilities unless we were able to start capturing some of those dollars that we wouldn't see otherwise in collective bargaining, because we would have been at the table for another 18, 19, or maybe forever. If you listen to some of the leadership that would have been at the table negotiating, their response was, we're never going to get there. And you heard things like sharpen your spears, and we're going to war, and we're going to battle. And those things were going on. They were playing on, both sides. We're playing this war of words that wasn't going to get anybody to the table. I saw it in Fond du Lac a couple of summers ago with Mercury Marine, and how once that got played out into the public, people weren't able to work together. Now here's the deal. I mean, I support collective bargaining in private unions. Because collective bargaining in private unions and the whole concept about collective bargaining is about sharing in the profits. That's the original creation. FDR, when he talked about negotiations, collective bargaining, talked about the shares of the profits. There aren't any profits in government. We're talking about additional taxpayer dollars, and the only person not at the table is the taxpayers. FDR himself, the king of the
union members are taxpayers.
The king of the labor movement, FDR, said there is no place in the public sector for unions and collective bargaining. Now, there is still, by the way, we didn't eliminate all collective bargaining. There's still collective bargaining on wages, but we eliminated some collective bargaining for things.
Up to a threshold that can't be crossed.
Which, by the way, if you look at the open records request between Governor Walker and members of the Democratic legislature that fled the state, that left their constitutional duty, he offered to eliminate the CPI. He offered to give back almost all of the collective bargaining components if they would come back and take it up and do it. Look at it. It's public record. And you know what their response was? Their response was, yeah, but will you include automatic dues check? We think everything sounds good. Will you include automatic dues check? Because you know what? At the end of the day, it was about automatic dues check. That's what it was about. It wasn't about the rights, because the rights, the collective bargaining component was offered back. They didn't take it, and they didn't come back.
Okay. You talked about how certain folks weren't willing to sit down with the governor who was he willing to sit down with
Well, I can tell you
from the unions and so
yeah,
forth?
I can tell you before, and some of the members in the local that I talked to were surprised to hear this because I was hearing the rhetoric before. But the secretary of the DOA did have a meeting with the head of the ASHME union, Marty Beal. There was a meeting with those two prior to everything happening. Now, a lot of what was going on was being played out, like I said, in public, in the media, which shouldn't have been done. But there was a meeting. But a lot of the public doesn't know that they had a meeting.
Yeah.
Because other sides, it's easier to say they wouldn't have a meeting with them when there was. And not only that, but I was having meetings with them. I was in the room. I was talking to members right up until the very moment that everything broke loose and we found out that the Democrats had left. I had them in my office the day of.
I think a lot of, well, I don't think, I know that a lot of union members, most union members, if not all, are frustrated with you. And, you know, I found something in doing some research. Is this picture accurate?
Yes, absolutely.
It is, okay, and it's got you wearing an AFSCME
Absolutely,
shirt.
absolutely.
So I
Well, let
think
me
this
tell you,
is one of the reasons why the union members feel sold out.
Yeah, well,
by
let me tell you the story about this.
Okay.
Because the number one concern, these are members of correctional facility, they're correctional workers, correctional officers. The number one concern they had at that time is many of their officers were being charged with frivolous lawsuits. Inmates were just launching them and literally turning their lives upside down. The legislation had tried to be passed over several legislative periods, and they were always at an impasse. So they came to me and said, "We need your help." Now, ironically, you know, the funny part of the story is several of the members in the picture, when I would have debates in the last session, would sit in the front row of every one of my debates. And every time I would talk, they would sneer, or they would say no. After the governor signed John Doe legislation, crediting my moving members of my caucus on board to get this important provision taken care of, they came to me to thank me for helping them get their number one concern off the table at that point, and gave me a shirt. I jokingly said, "Thanks, I'll save it and wear it for my next debate," which many of them laughed because they were the ones in the room. So they thanked me for that. I haven't stopped working for members of the correctional facilities, which have an extremely difficult job. I tried to get right to know legislation passed in the last session and was blocked by the Democratic majority, which, by the way, it's now passed. So I've continued to do things for them. We disagree on an issue. I'm being recalled on a vote, on a policy issue that they disagree with. But no one, you know, prior to all this, one of the leadership of their union came into my office and said, "Probably our group has not known a better friend on the Republican side than you." When the contracts didn't get voted through in December, you know how many calls I got? I got 10, because they all knew where I was voting. There's no surprise. Before this vote, there was no surprise because I talked to them. I went into the room and said, "By the way, here's why I don't agree with you." Because of, you know, had we done the budget repair bill, similar to the way the budget repair bill was done in my first session, my first term. The budget repair bill in the first term was introduced at 4 o'clock at night. We got it on our desks as minority members. We went to the governor's budget address that night. The next day we were on the floor of the Senate and it passed $1.2 billion in new taxes on job creators all around the state. Not a single public hearing, not a single hearing. And it passed and then the Assembly passed it, and within 36 hours, Governor Doyle signed that piece of legislation. With this budget repair bill, as a member of Joint Finance, I sat through 15 hours of public hearing.
But you passed it without a 24-hour notice too, didn't you?
Well, you know what? There's a special provision in the legislature. Who, by the way, since you know so much about this, you know who wrote that piece of legislation, I'm sure.
In Wisconsin?
In Wisconsin,
I have no idea.
the component that was used to pass the legislation, it was written by Senator Tim Cullen and Senator Fred Risser. Okay. Two of the people that were in Illinois wrote the piece of legislation, and the Supreme Court just ruled it legal.
Yeah, but the Supreme Court is controlled. It's a Republican caucus.
At the time that it's done, the legislative reference bureau, the legal counsel for the Senate, the clerk's office, which is a nonpartisan office, all went through the procedure and all signed off on the procedure to be 100% legal and then proved for by the Supreme Court.
All right. We've had some, and I know you probably have some more questions on the budget and so forth. We've had some viewer questions, and I want to try and get a couple of these in before we move on,
Sure.
and before we run out of time, too, because
Sure.
you know how fast this hour can go. One of these questions is, now that employees are being asked to pay more for their benefits, do you support plans which will add additional cost to the benefits? For example, like co-pays or high deductibles?
Well, I wouldn't answer that until I know, I need to know more specifics about saying that. I will tell you one of the things that I did pass within the budget was the health contributions for health copay, or the health contributions, made those pre-tax for all employees, which was something that helped all of our public employee union members.
Okay. And I asked if you had met with, union members from corrections, and you said
And the
yes, you did.
university.
What about public schools? Did you meet with the unions for,
Certainly,
public school
what?
teachers?
In fact, it was right after we took over the legislature, right after the Republicans gained control. I asked for a meeting of members of the teachers union, WEAC, and said to them, you know what? I'm glad now that I'm in the majority. You have to meet with me, because I've been trying to meet with you for the last 2 years, but you didn't care to meet with me for the last 2 years. And they missed an opportunity. President Obama's Race to the Top initiative, which was to reform the education process, and he and Secretary Duncan, I was the only Republican in the legislature in Wisconsin that voted in support of Race to the Top initiative. I was the only one. And I argued with my caucus and said, it's not where we want to be, but it's a step to where we want to go. And I said to members of the Democratic Education Committee, I've got the political courage to stand out on my own, to take the first step, to help reform the system, to help these kids. But if we're not successful, do you have the courage to take the second and third step? Now, the reason we weren't successful in that particular case, we'll tie this discussion back around. President Obama and Secretary Duncan wanted to use test scores as a component of the measurement for evaluating the teacher's performance. Not put everything on the test scores, but use it as a component. Specifically said, in order to receive this money, you need to do this. Well, the teachers union hated that. They didn't want it, so they blocked it in the Education Committee. So what the Education Committee did was watered it down to say, well, you can use test scores as a measurement if your school board collectively bargains for it. And they knew what it meant. They knew that no school board would open that up to collectively bargain for that, because they didn't have something to give on the other end. Now, after we weren't successful in receiving millions of dollars to help places like Milwaukee and Racine and areas that need money, that are a huge drain on our entire state, and we weren't successful, I went back to the Education Committee leaders and I said, okay, remember the speech? I'll take the first step. Why don't you take the second, third? And they said they weren't interested. What a great opportunity we should have seized on at that moment, when I'm in the minority, to say, okay, we're going to move this agenda forward. Here's someone who's willing to work with both sides to move the agenda forward. And they didn't take the opportunity. And I said to members of the Education Committee at that time, what a sad state of affairs to do that. And I also said that to the leadership at WEAC. The answer is yes. And in the process of the budget, I met with the superintendent and his leadership at Oshkosh, superintendent leadership in Fond du Lac, superintendent leadership in Waupun.
Okay.
No disrespect, but you're blowing us away on long answers. It's a good strategy, and I compliment you on it. But
It's no strategy. I'm trying to get the truth out.
I don't think most people can follow that long of discussion on anything. When a politician has to talk for 5-6 minutes on something, people are saying, he's really hiding something. I mean, really, I've been around a lot of politicians. You're a great speaker, but you're snowing us. I mean, there's snow all over the floor. Okay, so I want to ask some specific questions. In March, you called for the immediate resignation of UWO criminal justice professor Stephen Richards for encouraging his students to sign the recall. Why didn't you call for an investigation rather than calling for his firing, first of all?
Well, I can tell you there's two sides to this story, and I'll tell it quickly, okay?
Please.
One is a student approached me about a problem.
We know that, but why did you call to get him fired?
A student approached me about a problem with that.
Okay.
And I approached the chancellor and gave him that. We didn't go public with it. It was a different student.
Okay.
Then I hear about this through a news report. Now, this is after the fact that I'd been on the UW Oshkosh campus. I'd met with the chancellor. I'd met with his leadership. I'd met with his students, and no one mentioned it to me. If you heard the tape, which I'm sure you probably have done some investigative reporting and heard the tape, what that teacher was doing was indoctrinating. He was not educating. There's no room for that in the classroom. When students are complaining about that, he should have resigned. Now, I immediately got a call back from the chancellor, and knowing, because I spent years as a board member at Marian University, that there are internal systems that play in that particular realm, and I said, at that time when someone asked me, I said, the chancellor said he's handling it. It's the chancellor's responsibility to handle it, and I'm out of the process.
Okay. But you did ask for him to be fired.
If you heard the tape, you would have also.
Well, you heard the tape.
Yeah, but I mean, don't you give a guy? Don't you want to investigate things before? We don't want politicians coming into campus asking for people to be fired immediately. Do we? Why don't we say? Why don't we look into it? Why don't we investigate it?
Well, what else did we need to investigate, Dan? I mean, it was pretty clear on the tape that the teacher. Well, he was nice. He said, I'm not going to have you sign the paper inside the classroom. You can get up from your classroom, and go right outside. Like he's not going to look at who signed it afterwards. There was some of the worst intimidation and bullying, and we've seen it. Okay. I've seen it through this process where friends of mine who own businesses, and you know, Cheryl, I own a radio station in Fond du Lac, and I have a lot of small businesses, and a lot of small businesses that are supporters of mine because I've helped them grow their business for the last 20 years in this area. And so they sign a check to say they support me. Okay. And you know what happens? They get visited by a group of people that say, you know what, if you support him, we're going to boycott your business. Okay. And if you don't support our candidate, we're going to boycott your business. It's that kind of intimidation that some of these business people, they're a little older and they can handle it. But you know what? To have that happen in a classroom, there's absolutely... There's no room for it.
Totally agree.
He should have stepped down.
Keep the guns in the holster until there's an investigation. That's all. Okay. A couple of donors. Who are these guys? Ralph Steyer, $15,000 for your campaign from the Johnsonville Sausage. Jer Fabic, $20,000 from Fabo Equipment Company in Milwaukee. What do these people want from you?
Well, they don't want anything. In Ralph's instance, Ralph's been a friend of mine for probably 25 years.
Are they live in the
Ralph owns Johnsonville sausages.
Do they live in your district?
Ralph has a house in our district.
Okay.
And I've known Ralph since I was a young boy.
Okay.
And so, he's a friend of mine.
That's a ton of money.
Well, you know what? He's opposed and appalled by recalls for the reason of people doing it. It's the way the system goes. I will tell you this, and when we get through all this, we need to reinvestigate the entire process of the recalls to make sure there is a place for them. But they are for high crimes in office.
No, they're not. They're really not. That's not what the Constitution says. That's illegal.
Malfeasance in office?
Well, that's a little different.
So you're saying
you didn't commit a crime.
You're saying a vote because you disagree with the vote. Now, I have a question for you. I'll turn it. If you're running for office, and you know that if I make a tough, controversial vote, I'm going to have a recall on any given level, and they're successful in this, tell me when the next time someone's going to stand up and do it. Because I will tell you, in 2 years in Madison, I've seen a lot of posturing and sticking the finger up and saying, what will this happen politically? You know, I told the governor the day he introduced what he was going to do with collective bargaining, I said, you know, Governor, I have always said that it's more important for me to do this job than to keep this job. And given my district, the makeup in my district, given the last election, thanks for giving me an opportunity to prove that. We want people that have the political courage to make the tough vote. And when you do a process like this, you're going to eliminate it.
When's it ever happened before in Wisconsin?
Well, in this particular case?
The recall, yeah.
Well, it happened with PTAC, but PTAC went against what he said he was going to do.
But it's not it's not an annual sort of thing that's being used.
Well, I'll make you a bet right now. I'll make you a bet we're going to look at 3 elections in the next year, and you will see a cycle. if this is successful, you will see a cycle of recall elections that will happen upon happen. If people make a vote, you don't like the vote, and you can recall. There are assembly districts where you need 3,400 signatures to launch a recall.
You guys
there will be constant recalls and constant elections, and that will just be part of the system. If that's what the public wants, then that's
no.
what
The
they're gonna do.
Republicans you'll just pass a constitutional amendment to eliminate the recall
Well,
provision.
in order to pass a constitutional amendment,
twice-
you and I both, it needs to go through 2 cycles.
I understand
and then
it.
it goes to, by the way, it goes to the people to determine if
Well,
the
okay.
people want it.
Yeah.
We get a vote in it. And by the way, I introduced a constitutional amendment to ban raids on the transportation fund. It passed the first cycle on a bipartisan level. It needs to pass another one, and then it goes to where it should go. It goes to the people to vote on it. What's wrong with that process?
Let me jump
sorry,
in
I
here.
didn't mean-
That's
yeah,
all right.
yeah,
That's all right.
yeah.
You're worked up. I was
no,
worked
well,
up the
yeah,
last time Randy was here.
I'm
And
glad.
I'm still worked up, but
You're very effective, and I mean that as a compliment, but it's really hard to go through this when we get these long historical answers to a current question.
well, because we've got a lot of ground to cover.
Yeah.
So,
Well, there's a basis behind them.
one of the things, and I know you've heard it, this is an assault on middle class, working class, low income folks, and the budget's being balanced on all of our backs. Well, a lot of tax breaks, millions and millions of dollars worth of tax breaks are being given to corporations and the wealthy. Now, this whole thing really started because, hey, we're broke. That was the terminology, that was the phrase that came out of Madison. We're broke. The American people, the Wisconsin people can't afford this any longer, okay? But the working class and the lower income folks, we're the ones who are going to really get screwed in all of this, and some of us already are. Because if our state taxes don't go up, municipalities are just going to find ways to institute fees, or we're going to have services cut. There's no question about it. Michelle Litchin's sitting there saying, oh, looky here, you're still going to have the same level of services and your taxes aren't going up. This woman is out to lunch if she thinks that's the case, and anyone else who thinks that is out to lunch. That simply can't be. You can't have one and still have the other.
Well, you should talk to Mark Harris then, because I worked.
I'm talking to him. He'll be here tonight. We're taping another show with him.
Well, wonderful,
So-
because the contributions to the pension, because Mark already had health care contributions on behalf of Winnebago County, but the contributions to the pension will offset the losses in state aid to the county. So he's going to realize those. And by the way, Oshkosh is running up, and ask him about the mill rate. And Oshkosh is running up against the mill rate, and that's going to create a problem where services would have to have been cut. But Mark came to me and said, I need help with this. I tried to get it passed in the last legislature. I couldn't get it passed, and we got it passed in this one. Let's talk about the tax credits. The tax credits that you're referring to are for future jobs. They don't affect this budget at all. That's the starting point. They are for future new jobs created in the state. So either people are misleading it or don't understand it. We're not writing a check for $120 million that's going to corporation versus going to school. This is about anybody who's interested in creating a new job or a new opportunity for those people that you're talking about. The idea is the current system is not working. This constant cycle of dependency is not working. We've got to break that. So we're still going to collect personal income taxes, property taxes. We're still going to collect taxes. It's sunset on some of the revenue that some of these job creators have if they decide to relocate to Wisconsin, because it all starts with creating an opportunity to find someone a job. And by the way, you want to solve education problem? Add 10 jobs in a decreasing enrollment area like Oakfield. That's going to be a game changer. That's not happening right now. And so we're competing against every other state to try to lure people that want to create opportunity for our citizens. This is going to do this for a temporary period of time. They're going to see a reduction on income taxes for the corporation, still paying all the other taxes, creating a new job that currently doesn't exist. Right now, if they don't come, we pay zero.
But in
if
the
they don't create
meantime,
a job, we pay
the budget
zero.
is still being balanced on.
It's not-
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Yes, it is, Randy. It's still the middle income people are the ones who are feeling this the most.
And I understand that, and it's things like, for the first time we're going to freeze property taxes. Middle income families right now are not going to see their property taxes raise. Seniors are not going to see their property taxes make them move out of their homes. That's a huge component in all this. And what it's also going to do is it's going to create an opportunity so that they have tax credits for corporations. I was involved with Governor Doyle and Secretary Leinenkugel to pass an enterprise zone for Oshkosh Corporation so that they could compete against other companies in other states, so they could get some of the contracts that have some of those people that you're talking about currently working.
And again, the corporations continue to get the big breaks. And listen, I'm not disputing the fact that Oshkosh Corp is a great employer. They're an asset to this community, and they provide hundreds, if not thousands of jobs, thousands worldwide. We're not disputing that. It's the fact that these organizations continue to get tax break after tax break after tax break, while middle income people are suffering. Low income people are suffering. I think that it's much more difficult for middle income and low income people to cough up an extra $100 or so a month than it is for a multi-billion-dollar corporation to take a little bit of a hit, or maybe to not get so much of a check being given to them, or a bonus being given to them, or whatever you want to call it, tax break, tax credit, whatever. It just incenses me. And you talked about the taxes that you are collecting. I'll tell you what you're not collecting is some of those taxes that were done away with when you took away some of those corporate tax loopholes that had been closed. Remember, we talked about that when you were here last time. Mm-hmm. Now, when Gordon Hentz was on last time or the time before that, he said that some of those tax loopholes that had been closed, those were taken away now. So those are some additional taxes that you guys aren't collecting. Why would you do that?
Well, in November it was pretty clear when I got an opportunity to go around the state and help my colleagues get elected. And what everyone has said is, listen, we need to focus on job creation. Over the last couple of years, under the plan that you're embracing, 150,000 people in the state of Wisconsin lost their jobs.
I don't believe that.
150,000 people in the last 2 years lost their job. Private
because
sector
of that?
Well, not just because of that. Because of the overall environment.
I don't believe it was because of that at all.
I will tell you what. It's because of the environment. We almost lost Mercury Marine and Fond du Lac, in large part because of the business environment in the state of Wisconsin.
But were they affected by the combined reporting?
They're affected by combined reporting, and not only that, but they're affected by a tax credit, which was used to help keep them here as opposed to going to Oklahoma. It would have been disastrous to the south part of my district had Mercury Marine left our area.
Okay, a couple things quick. State employees are giving up benefits on more on the retirement and more on their health care. They're paying more. You're a state employee. Did the legislature have to bite the bullet on that too?
Absolutely. In fact, what I would tell you, before I got there, they were given a raise.
Okay.
The legislature was given a raise. It has to be done in the previous section. And we had an opportunity to either keep the raise, give the state the money back, or donate the raise. I wasn't going to keep it. Some legislators did. I wasn't going to give it back because they were going to waste it. So what I did was I donated to the Strong Kids campaign in Oshkosh, Fond du Lac, and in Dodge counties.
But all your colleagues are taking a hit on health care and retirement?
Everybody.
Okay, all right, that's fine.
There's nothing that we're doing in the legislature that we haven't asked. And that includes, by the way, we weren't required to take furlough days under the Doyle administration as legislators. I took the most egregious form of furlough days that you could take. There were two different options you could take. Okay. One was a bigger hit than the other, and I took those because there's nothing I haven't asked a state employee to do that I haven't been willing to stand.
The new voter ID bill.
Yep.
Is there voter fraud in your district?
You know what? One vote that's fraudulent that cancels out my vote matters.
Is there any voter fraud in your district?
One vote that cancels. Well, you know what? Here's a great example. You talked about this professor the other day. Who said in that tape, one of his students said, "Yeah, but I live at home." And he goes, "Oh, but that's okay. Just get a student ID here because then you can, gaming the system." So even in that video, that audio tape that you talked about, there was coercion for someone to commit some form of voter fraud. The answer to the question is we ought to expel any potential for any kind of things to happen within the voter. It's one vote, one person. We worked with the county clerks to make sure that it was implemented, in the next cycle so that we get an opportunity. There are about 1 million more people in the state of Wisconsin. There's 3 million plus people that have a current state official issued license than voted in the last presidential election. So if it happens in one place, if it happens in Milwaukee and it cancels out my vote on a statewide vote, then I'm appalled by it, and you ought to be too.
I tell you, I spent 10 years as a voter, precinct voter person, including some at LB Hall at the university. There have been minimal mistakes on clerking. There's no voter fraud in Oshkosh.
Well, and that's fantastic,
Yeah.
because our clerks in Fond du Lac and Oshkosh run a great show.
Right. So as a district, why are you supporting something that basically is going to squeeze voters in Milwaukee and really set up a chance for the Republicans to win Wisconsin in the 2012 president? Isn't this what that's really about?
Is that what you think it's about?
It's going on all over the country.
I actually think it's about that. I don't want someone canceling out my vote wherever they
You
are
don't
in
want
the
new
state.
voters and
I want new voters. I want new voters,
Really?
and we expanded beyond the original bill. We worked and negotiated and expanded to include additional forms of identification. This is about trying to make it, a fair legal process. And anybody who would support anything that had anything to do with fraud, whether it's one or not, I'll ask you, why would you support that? Why would you support that? Why wouldn't you support a system that eliminated all potential fraud, whether it's 1 or 200? I don't understand why anybody would
because
stand on that
you set
side.
up a straw person. If there's one vote, I'm going to vote. One voter fraud, I'm going to vote for it. This is a clean state election-wise. You're squeezing it. You're going to make it more difficult for new voters to vote. You're going to make it more difficult for poor people to vote.
Why would I make it more difficult for a poor person to vote?
Because they're not going to vote Republican in 2012.
Well, why would I make it more? Why would that make it more difficult for them to vote?
What you're doing, you're making all of these rules on IDs and stuff.
Well, how would you make that about? I would make it harder on a poor person to vote. Why are you making that distinction? I don't understand that.
Because this is a class warfare, Randy.
Well, you're the one that's trying to make it about a class warfare.
No, the budget bill is class warfare.
By the way, if someone can't afford an ID, it one's provided for them free of charge.
Oh, good. Yeah.
So take that argument
they're
and
not
take
gonna-
those talking points out of this argument, because what you're doing is you're trying to create this sense that there's some kind of class war. What I'm trying to do is eliminate any potential fraud in an election system, and as Americans, we ought to all be in favor of that.
Right.
And why you're standing in opposition to that only makes me think that maybe you benefit from the current system.
How do I benefit from the current system?
Well, why are you standing against the change?
Because you're screwing the people that are least likely to vote.
Well, it's making things more difficult for
Yeah,
people,
yeah.
and I have no problem with somebody showing an ID. Okay, I've got no problem with that. But when you make changes to, for students, it's going to really hurt them because they go to school here 9 months out of the year, and a lot of elections, I think just about all elections, other than a recall election like this,
Happen in November.
exactly, or in spring.
Then what's the issue if it's in November? You have plenty of time to establish your residence somewhere within your dorm or somewhere within your residence hall or your apartment, all the apartment buildings around it. You can establish your residence and you're fine. It's not an issue. You have a student ID, which will now be included in the bill,
Okay,
which
great.
was an issue that they thought we were trying to suppress. Student, that's not.
And you
the
changed
case.
that to
That's
make-
yeah. But by the way, there's adapting in this process throughout the course of this. It's not all one-sided the way some people like to project it is. We've worked on amendments to the bills that have been passed. There's no, that's been an important factor in this whole, 6 months.
Can you talk briefly about how it changes things with respect to absentee voting?
Well, you can still fill out your absentee form. I mean, that's still part of the process. In fact, I think you're going to find that certainly in this process, we know for a fact before the students left, there was a huge movement upon the campus to get absentee nomination papers signed by students who would be gone.
That could vote in a recall.
That could vote in a recall. Now, they're not residents here.
Yeah.
They're residents of wherever their parents live or wherever they're working in the summer. But there was a movement on that. Now, I have a question for you. Is that voter fraud? If you're going to do that, if they're not a resident here, is that voter fraud? In my district, If they live here, they should have a right to vote here. But if they live in La Crosse and they don't live here, but they're trying to get them to fill out forms, is that some form of fraud?
If they live here 9 months a year to go to school, aren't they a resident of Oshkosh and UWO where they go to school?
And guess what? And they could fill out an absentee ballot and vote. And this doesn't stop them from doing it.
Well, let's investigate and see if they're really doing that. My guess is they're not.
Okay. Well, there was a huge movement before.
Well, huge. Your side exaggerates too.
Okay, we're running out of time here. Very quickly, some budget highlights. You know, what is happening with like senior care and Medicaid?
Okay.
Are people losing BadgerCare if they don't have children?
Well, let's take senior care quickly. The governor had eliminated senior care, or he had moved everybody who was receiving senior care to move into Medicare Part D. Senator Darling and I came out the day that we saw that and said we're going to save senior care. Now we took some hits from our side right away, but you know what? One of the best things I did in this budget process, and we did a lot of good things for veterans and did a lot of good things for a lot of people, was Senator Darling and I found a way to find the money to save senior care. Seniors who are on senior care right now will be on senior care, next year.
Okay. Medicaid?
Medicaid, we're dealing with federal. That's federal issue.
BadgerCare.
BadgerCare, people that are part of the MA plan, if they're currently in the system, like members who are currently receiving family care, will receive family care. So that will still be there. If you're currently receiving thing, now what was done was there was a freeze put on family care to investigate because it was growing beyond our ability to fund it. But one of the things about those MA funds, the governor allotted $1.2 billion to those very funds. Governor Doyle had allotted $1.7 billion, or increased the pool to $1.7 billion, but that was all one-time federal money that he used to expand the program. We didn't have the federal money this time, but still find a way to make sure those people were on. And the legislature added to that on joint finance. I was part of this to add an additional 400 slots, or 25 million, for emergency cases of people that are sort of in the process right now but can't get into the system. We'll be able to get into the system.
Okay. What about people who don't have children? Because that was something where the program was expanded under Governor Doyle. And so what's happening with those folks? Are they going to fall back through the cracks again?
I don't believe they'll fall back through the cracks, but it's something I'll look at for you.
Okay. So they may very well be losing their health insurance.
No, well, let's not scare people on there. I mean, let's not scare. What I said is, if they're in the system on things like family care right now, BadgerCare right now, MA is funded at $1.2 billion. It was, by the way, the largest single increase. New allocation of state dollars.
Family care for people with children?
No, not necessarily.
Okay.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
No, it's
right.
individuals. The idea behind family care is we'd like to keep people in their homes, elderly people in their homes, as opposed to moving them to a facility. And by the way, at the end of the day, we save more money as a state by keeping them in their homes, moving to a facility.
All right.
But the costs are going beyond the means to be able to pay for them.
Wow. I wish we had like another hour. we're just,
Maybe you'll invite me back.
Well, I hope so. We're not going to get, and I apologize, we're not going to get to everybody's questions who sent in questions. Want to talk about a couple of personal issues, and ordinarily we wouldn't get into someone's personal issues. But when Representative Gordon Hentz was here the last time, we got into some personal things with him, and so we want to do that with you too, not because it's pleasant, but you in particular have run on an issue of family values, and so we think the questions are fair.
That was your kind of introduction when we first met you when you were running, and you made a big deal about your family and family.
I've never run on family values, but that's all right.
Now you filed for divorce in last August?
It's a private matter that I'm not going to talk about my family with those issues. I mean, it's absolutely. I am getting divorced.
Okay.
I'm amazed that people talk a lot about your soon-to-be ex-wife signed your recall papers. I would say, as journalists, you'd probably look that up and see that she didn't. Yeah, I know. Well, and people don't check, but they say to me all the time. Well, she said, well, she
true.
didn't.
Yeah.
And the time that she talked to the protesters and said she supported my opponent, she was in Colorado because I was in the House. We're doing our best to raise our 2 children.
Okay.
We are
Understand?
getting divorced, and it's a private matter.
Okay.
Okay. Valerie Cass was hired on February 7th of this year in the Department of Regulation and Licensing at a salary of $11,128 more than her predecessor. Is that correct?
I have absolutely no idea. That'd be something to ask the people that she works for.
She is the woman that you're dating, though, correct?
It's a private matter. I'm not going to...
Okay. Well, at least Gordon answered personal questions.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, these are, you know, there were questions about your residency as well.
Yeah, you know, that's a great question. The day that came out, I called one of my competitors at another radio station in Fond du Lac because he reported it, and I heard him report it. And I said, grab your tape recorder, I'm going to come pick you up. And I went and picked him up in my car, and I called the station manager and said, I'm going to give you an exclusive. Picked him up in my car, and I drove to my apartment. And I sat in my living room in my apartment, dirty dishes and all, and I said, Greg, now you can do your interview. And he said, I am now doing this interview from the apartment of the senator of the... I've always lived in the district. I've never not lived in the district. I've never had a place outside of the district. I was in a transition period in the process of getting divorced, which is hard on my family. And the fact that there are some that will use that for political gain is appalling to me. And so I will do everything I can to protect my family and especially my children. And I think everybody else would do the exact same.
Okay.
Quick question. The governor still wants to pull Madison out of the UW system. Are you in favor of that?
No, I'm not.
Okay. How do you really think this is going to work out? You know, turnout is key, but you've been around campaigning. What?
Well, I've been around campaigning. This is my second one. I mean,
Well, I know.
I'm so veteran.
Yeah.
I've done one other
Yeah, well, you
campaign in
must
my entire life.
I mean, you probably don't want to say that, but you know, where do you think you're at on this?
You know what? If you look at someone who's focused on job creation for his district and working across the aisle with both sides, you know, it's people that, like I said, that were originally going to sign the recall petition that have had an opportunity to talk with me and have said, you know what, I have a change of heart. In talking to you, I'm going to support you.
You're going to lose Winnebago County?
No, I'm going to win Winnebago.
You're going to win Winnebago?
Absolutely.
I thought you might win Dodge, but I'd be surprised.
I'm going to win Fond du Lac, I'm going to win Winnebago,
Oh,
and I'm going to win
really?
Dodge.
Wow.
Absolutely.
Okay.
All right. Excellent. Well, I wish you well.
Thank you.
You
I
know.
can tell from the questions you guys are just
Well,
rooting for me.
But they're fair questions, Randy. I mean, look, you know, you and I go back a lot of years. I used to work for you. That was probably, I don't know, 13, 14 years ago.
It was a while ago.
It was a while ago. So we've known each other a while. We're not friends, but I don't think we're necessarily adversaries. I don't like your vote at all on this budget and the way I think it has really raped and pillaged, you know, middle-income folks. But I support some of your other votes.
You know,
so anyway.
let's see what happens.
Okay. All right. Thanks for being
coming
here.
in.
We appreciate it. All right.
Thank you.
And that's going to do it for us. We will see you next time. Until then, take care. Keep your eye on us. We've got our eye on Oshkosh.